Mr. Green was a tall, thin man with bulging black eyes that sat behind a pair of wire-framed glasses and an inexplicable love for fedoras. He was also my history teacher. In the classroom setting, Mr. Green was a decent teacher, the word decent being used liberally. He was not the funniest or the most engaging teacher the university had to offer, but he definitely got the job done. I understood his explanations, and his notes were easy to comprehend. When he gave assignments, they were simplified. I wasn't the brightest student, but when it came to history, I understood perfectly. Which is why I didn't understand why I was doing this first-year course again in my second year. My issues had apparently tracked from missing assignments I was absolutely certain I had turned in, to a giant F on the exam which I was certain was impossible because I knew what I had written. It was not until I started noticing the deeply unsettling way Mr. Green looked at me during classes and whenever we crossed paths in the hall, and the fact that he somehow knew my name, despite the fact that I'd never spoken in his class and I was one of the many students, that I started to really get suspicious. I had questions, and all of them pointed to the teacher himself. Was I imagining things? Or was there a sexual undertone to the way he looked at me with lingering gazes? Especially when I wore outfits that revealed more skin than usual. But these were questions I could not bring myself to ask outside the privacy of my head. Falsely accusing a faculty member of misconduct was a serious offense, punishable by suspension or even expulsion. As months passed and Mr. Green made no moves, I started to think I was imagining things. But then, one day after class, he asked me to wait behind and meet with him. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't what I got. He told me that I was flunking his course again, and at this rate, I would carry the course over for yet another year. I argued that it was not possible, but he brought out one of my test scripts and showed it to me. I had, in fact, failed. But on close observation, I realized that his marking scheme seemed unfair, and I was drastically losing marks for every mistake. I tried to bring it up, but he claimed that he was this way with everyone, and as I had no proof otherwise, I fell silent. He mentioned that he taught a class here every night, and if I wanted to pass, I'd have to be in attendance, starting from that night. Reluctantly, I agreed. The thought of being a third-year student in a first-year class scared me. I worried about being here with him at night, but I was comforted by the fact that I'd not be alone. It was a class, after all. Besides, he hadn't done anything suspicious. At night, I came to class, only to find it empty. I was starting to think I'd misheard when Mr. Green came in. I asked about the rest of the class, and he told me I was early, and they'd be here shortly. 30 minutes passed, and there was no sign of any other students. Suddenly, I became aware of the fact that Mr. Green and I were here alone. He came and sat with me and talked about my grades and how failure would look bad on my results and affect my future and maybe even delay my graduation. I thought he was being motivational until his hand rested on my thigh. I flinched and he retreated, only to go around and stand behind me. He continued to touch me inappropriately while he talked. I stood up and asked him to stop, but he smiled and said this was the way to pass his course. Irritated, I walked away, intending to leave, only to find the door locked. I was trapped with him. He confessed to everything, failing me on purpose, shredding my assignments, arranging this meeting. He said I had no choice but to give him what he wanted. He tried to reach for me and I resisted. He got upset and started to get violent with me and me. Before he could go further, I retrieved a can of pepper spray from my bag and got him right in the face. While he was squirming, I kicked him in the jewels, snatched the keys from him, and fled. The next day, I reported him to the principal. But to my utter disbelief, I was threatened with expulsion if I didn't stop. And so I did. The next week, I transferred to a new class and started to save up for a taser. But that was not the last I'd hear of Mr. Green. He was greatly offended by his failed attempt to have his way with me, and he showed in a way that only I would know he was responsible, and in a way that discredited me if I ever tried to oust him again. I noticed that something had happened when the students I passed in the hallway started to give me strange looks, some of them seemingly disgusted, even though I had never had a conversation with most of them. It took almost a week to find out that someone had spread a rumor that I had slept around with fellow students for money and with my lecturers in exchange for good grades. And the reason I was still in Mr. Green's class and finally had to switch course was that he was the only one who refused my advances. Naturally, I knew who had spread the rumor, even though I didn't know how and certainly couldn't prove it. I returned one evening to my dorm to see that someone had gotten real creative and spray-painted "Go to hell" on my door. I thought my life could not get any worse. But that might have jinxed it, because in the month that followed, it certainly did. Pictures of me surfaced online. Indecent pictures of me in various degrees of They were pictures I'd never sent to anyone because I had never taken them. The pictures were photoshopped, and I could tell because I could link a couple to the normal pictures on my Instagram. Some of the pictures involved me with male students, although they were conveniently dressed in the photos. But they seemed to be spreading word that I was in fact the one in the pictures, bragging about how it was easy to get with me. I started getting advances from students, and when I turned them down, they resorted to calling me names. The school faculty caught wind of the matter, and I was suspended and scheduled to face the disciplinary panel. My life was ruined. I was already preparing myself for the move away from the university and from the town when I got a visit from Lucas. He was a tech wizard and the only friend I'd managed to make since I got admitted. And it turned out, despite the rumors, he was in fact still my friend. And he had with him the proof of my innocence. Enough to defend myself before the panel. He had compiled the original photos and put them side by side with the doctored images of me. But it was not enough. It would only be a matter of time before Mr. Green tried something else. I admitted everything to Lucas, and he said he had a plan to expose everything. His thought was since Mr. Green was still hurt enough to continue tormenting me, it was likely he still wanted to get with me. Asking me to trust him, he told me what to do. I was to visit Mr. Green in the evening while he was grading papers and accuse him, to which Lucas anticipated he would deny it at first. Then I was to beg him to end the torment and offer to do whatever it took to make it all go away. Whatever happened from there, I was to play along and trust that Lucas would have my back. It happened as Lucas predicted. I approached Mr. Green in his office, and when I pleaded, he said, the only way was for me to let him have his way with me and allow myself to be subject to whatever degradation he would put me through. Playing along as Lucas instructed, I asked if that would make all the rumors and the fake go away, and he assured me it would. After uttering a silent prayer that Lucas knew what he was doing, I agreed to it. He asked me to and reluctantly I did, disgusted by the way his eyes roamed my exposed chest. Mr. Green unzipped his and got it from the waist down. He leaned back against his desk and asked me to get on my knees before him. He was not done speaking when the door burst open. Standing in the doorway was a flustered dean and 2 security guards. Without waiting to hear Mr. Green's side, they put him in handcuffs and dragged him away while he rambled on about how I had seduced him. The dean apologized to me while avoiding eye contact until I was fully dressed again. Curious, I asked how he knew to come when he did, and why he believed me now, and he told me that he'd been in his office playing poker on his laptop when he usually did, when someone took over his laptop screen and played a live video from a hidden camera somewhere on the bookshelf that neither I nor Mr. Green had noticed. As he spoke, Lucas casually walked past the open doorway and winked at me. Instantly, I understood that he'd snuck in there and tapped the room. The dean promised that all my offenses would be cleared and I'd be compensated somehow, and Mr. Green would get jail time. In the days that followed, the eyes continued to stare, but they were sympathetic and ashamed now. I could only hope that the students before me who had given in to him would find some solace now.
I sat before the 32-inch television in my hostel lounge, watching the news. I had heard a tiny piece of information about earlier. It was about the murder of 3 high school students at a neighboring high school. The school got locked after the event and investigations commenced immediately. The news had spread fast, and everyone had their different opinions on the event. I also had mine. 2 years ago, on my 16th birthday, my best friend died in the school toilet, and I was the first to know. When the school authorities found out that I knew about it, they begged me to stay silent about it forever, and further placed me on a scholarship which had me stuck in the school. I was now always under their watch and lived as stealthily as possible to protect my life, because it would be easy to take me out and hide my body as they did with my best friend. So I walked out of the lounge to my room, where I laid on my side trying to clear my mind of the traumatic experience after Luisa's death. I quickly fell asleep and woke up the next morning to attend classes. I entered the class to find a familiar face addressing my course mates. It was my teacher from high school that resigned after Luisa's death. He'd grown now and looked more graceful than he used to be, with his beard full and luring wide chest that had endured the strain of gym workouts. He didn't seem to remember me, or he acted like he didn't as he continued addressing the class while I had my seat. "Once again, my name is Dwayne Edison." He let out a sigh of relief and walked out of the class hurriedly. I was tempted to approach him, but my uneasiness from last night's news hadn't dissipated. I still felt depressed, and the topic wasn't going to leave the lips of my course mates anytime soon. I heard the students' lungs were harvested and sewn back neatly that it was almost invincible. I heard someone say behind me in a conversational tone with someone. I attempted to stand up and leave the hall, but decided to get more information on the event from sheer curiosity. "That's not possible," the other student whizzed. "I know, but I heard that cut wasn't in the chest region, but under the armpit. They were lucky to have found out about it, and the police are now looking for suspected human parts traffickers," the loud feminine voice retorted. "How do you know all these?" "My dad's a police officer, and my mom works as a nurse in the school's medical," she snapped. "These pieces of information are legit and are at the tip of my fingers." So it did happen, and it was a case of organ harvesting and even much more, but that's all I know for now. "Moreso, since the organ harvester is still at large, don't share this information with anyone." She paused and whispered so softly that I could only hear because I was paying full attention. "Some thinks it's one of the teachers, but they're all vindicated by the school and have gotten work elsewhere." "So?" someone asked. "No college student is safe, especially those at the age of 18. That's the age range of the recent killings," she replied, and must have caught me listening. I heard a silent thug on her questionnaire's shoulder as they walked past me toward the door. I shouldn't have listened. I buried my head in my hands and sighed deeply, with glints of worry and fear forming a cloud over my thought process. I was curious now and had the urge to find out what had happened. Later that evening, on my way to the hostel, I heard a whisper in the pitch darkness I had walked past. I turned swiftly to catch the silhouette of a familiar figure waving at me. I strained my eye further and deducted it was Edison, our new science lecturer. "Sandra," he waved with a smile on his cheek. "Good evening, sir." "It's cold. Let's have a cup of coffee down there." He pointed to the faint light outside the hostel. I knew they served the best coffee there and subconsciously started walking towards the light with him. "How did it end up?" He asked me a question I didn't understand. "What?" I raised a brow and let the cup of coffee out of my lip. Its warmth slapped my face, but I was more worried about his question. 2 years ago, in the toilet. Luisa. He squinted, probably guessing if I was the one or not. I understood him, but it was too dangerous to admit knowledge of Luisa's death, which the school begged me to keep, so I kept a straight face. "I'm sorry, I don't remember anything," I said, when it wasn't looking like he believed me. "I had mental illness last year," I said, to further defend my ignorance. "Oh, sorry about that," he whispered. "See me in the lecturer's quarters tomorrow morning for your next project evaluation." He exhaled and paid the bills, then stormed away. He was angry, but I couldn't tell why, and couldn't worry, lest so I had to rethink and decide to confide in him when I see him in the morning. I needed to talk to someone. I woke up the next morning earlier than I used to and quickly prepared to go to his quarters. It was a few miles away, but I got there before 9 a.m. and knocked on his big red mahogany door. "Come in," I heard him answer behind the door. I knew he saw me when I arrived from the flickering red light on the CCTV at his front porch. "Good morning," he greeted me. He wasn't fully dressed, so he excused himself to get dressed while I had my seat. He had a lot of papers clustered together on the table, and my curiosity to read its content won me over as I lifted the pages and went through it briefly. It included his CV and documents, which felt warm on my palm like they were just printed. I went through the places he had worked and saw my high school, then a school 2 cities away. I became bored until my eye caught the name of the school that had a murder case of 3 high school students. I also found out he just had the degree to teach in a college and my school was his first try. I was busy checking the documents when I heard his footsteps. I quickly dropped the papers and sat upright. "Do you have somewhere you should be?" he asked quietly and turned to see him wearing an apron with gloves and a nose mask. "Are you going somewhere?" "Yes." "No, girl, you are the lab rat," he giggled and bolted towards me, catching my right arm. "I should be on my way," I revolted. "You should be here," he giggled and slapped my face, then pushed me to the floor. I scurried away from his feet, but he stomped his foot on my chest and stood above me. I groaned in pain and pushed, but he kept smiling and brought out a syringe from his apron pocket. As he silently whistled a song, I couldn't tell. You wouldn't be a different case, and would soon meet Louisa on the other side. He finally injected me and lifted me upon his shoulder as he walked up the stairs. Whatever he injected me with had not completely knocked me out like he had thought. I got a hold of a knife protruding from his apron pocket, and as he ascended the stairs, I stabbed his neck. He flung me off his shoulder, and we both started falling down the stairs. He remained still after a while, maybe dead. I crawled toward the couch where I picked up my phone to dial 911. It rang, but I passed out. The hair on my neck stood up, and I got the eerie feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder but didn't see anyone suspicious. Perhaps I was being paranoid. I sighed and I continued my walk home. I got into the elevator of my apartment building. I stayed on the 4th floor. Just before the elevator doors closed, a hand stuck out between them and a man got in. He wore a black polo shirt and black jeans, and a part of me thought he probably wanted to spy on someone because spies always dress like that in movies. He didn't look at me till the elevator reached my floor. When the doors opened, his head suddenly snapped to me and I hurried out, unnerved. I got to my apartment and soon forgot my encounter with the creepy spy. I fired up my laptop and started working. I worked as a freelancer and that was what had been paying the bills. I wrote essays for college students too lazy or incompetent to do so, and it was funny how many of them were willing to pay a lot. At this rate, I'd soon be able to afford a place of my own. The next day, I went to the restaurant just down the street to get something to eat because I was too tired to cook. When I was eating, I saw the same spy guy from the elevator walk into the restaurant. Our gazes met and he gave me a shy smile. I nodded back to him and I resumed my meal. It was a little after 8 when I started to walk back home. The spy guy jogged to my side. I groaned inwardly. I didn't want to talk to anyone. "I've seen the way you look at me. You clearly want to be with me." "What?" It was so surreal that this was happening. Nothing in my life could have prepared me for this. I shook my head and attempted to walk away because he clearly wasn't a sane person. "Janice, where are you going?" A part of me wondered how he knew my name, but I didn't dwell on that as it dawned on me that this place was deserted. Of course, it was late and this was a residential area. Most people were in their homes already. I quickened my pace, my heart beating faster when I heard his footsteps behind me. I wanted nothing to do with him. In a clear, strong voice, I told him that if he didn't stop following me, I would have to call the cops. I was relieved when he listened to me, and I hurried home, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. It took a while before I was able to sleep. I checked the door 3 times to convince myself that it was locked. A rustle brought me back to consciousness, and my eyes opened suddenly, my heart in my throat. Standing above me was the guy from earlier. I opened my mouth to scream, and he covered it with his large, meaty hand, muffling my screams. With his other hand, he covered my nose with a handkerchief, and I tried all I could do to dislodge his hand while trying to hold my breath. My attempts failed, and my vision went dark. When I came back to my senses, the first thing I was aware of was that I was being moved. Then I noticed that my mouth was taped shut and my hands were tied. I opened my eyes, still feeling a little woozy from whatever had knocked me out. I was lying down in the back seat of a car, and I tried not to move as my eyes roamed over my surroundings. My stalker was in the driver's seat, nodding his head in time to a song playing on the radio. His eyes met mine through the rearview mirror and he smiled at me. My hands itched to slap it off his face. I brought myself up to a sitting position. I was still wearing my tank top and shorts that I had slept in, and his eyes roamed over my body appreciatively. I looked away in disgust and I stared outside the window. It was either very late or very early. It was still very dark outside, and it seemed like we were the only ones on the road. The car slowed down and he parked by the side of the road. He got down and he came to my side. I quickly shuffled towards the other side, but he just chuckled, telling me that he liked the fact that I was feisty. He crawled into the car and towered over me. I writhed beneath him, but he pinned me down with his weight. His hands tugged my tank top down and exposed my chest. He licked his lower lip. A tear ran down my cheek and I yelled for him to stop. The tape made sure my protest sounded like nothing, and he didn't even look up at my face. His hands covered my chest and he squeezed me roughly. I buckled beneath him and he released me, rubbing a hand on himself. "Not yet," he groaned. "We'll live together forever and you will love me." I gulped, unable to scream anymore. My life, everything I had worked hard for, was this how I would lose it all? No, something in me hardened. I would not let anyone ruin my life, even if it meant I died trying. I raised my knees and they hit him right in the middle of his legs. He yelled and crumpled, his hands going to the point of pain. I scampered over him, successfully getting out. I ran in the opposite direction, nothing bothering to look back. I heard him still groaning and I propelled myself to move even faster, adrenaline coursing through me. "Janice!" he yelled. I whimpered, begging whatever God was out there to save me. Headlights shone in my direction, and I dashed into the road without thinking. The car honked, but I refused to slow down, and just as the car came to a sudden stop, I crashed into it and lost consciousness yet again. This time, when I woke to see a doctor's face. I was in the hospital. The car owner brought me here frantically last night, scared he had killed someone. The doctor said he was still waiting outside to see me, and if I felt up to it, he would send him in. I agreed to it, and the doctor called him in before leaving to give us some privacy. He introduced himself as Cole and asked me what had happened. I narrated everything from the beginning, my voice wavering when I talked about the part of me being assaulted. When I was done, Cole looked livid and promised me that he would do all that he could in his power to protect me. I believed him, and when I got discharged, he took me to the police station to file a report. We started spending more time together, and I found that I enjoyed his company. Maybe one day the cops would find the man who attacked me, but I was so grateful that I got to meet Cole. Maybe something good would come out of our friendship.